Hello, and thank you for your interest in the Iowa Water Center Graduate Student Supplemental Grants Competition. My name is Melissa Miller, and I'll be your presenter for this webinar. This is my 6th grant cycle overseeing IWC's competitive grants program, which is skillfully facilitated by Hannah Bates, who is the Iowa Water Center Program Assistant. So today's seminar is focused on applying to the Iowa Water Center's open call for proposals in 2017 for the 2018 grant year. But this seminar was designed so that much of the information will be applicable to most grant opportunities available to you now and in the future. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now so we can get to the PowerPoint. So just bear with me for a second. Now, before we begin with the grants application process, I want to give you a little bit of information on the background of the Iowa Water Center. The Water Center is one of 54 water resources research institutes. There's one in each U.S. state and then 4 U.S. territories, and they were created in response to the Water Resources Research Act of 1964. This legislation essentially recognized that states have both the need and the ability to address critical and emerging water resource challenges locally. Because our charge is research, outreach, and education, the institutes are primarily located at land-grant institutions. The map shows the location of the 54 institutes. We are administered through the U.S. Geological Survey within the Department of the Interior through an annual operating grant with funds appropriated by Congress every year. Funding research is an integral part of the Iowa Water Center program. Our competitive grants program has historically served faculty with emerging or innovative ideas through our seed grant competition. These projects, on average, are funded at $30,000 a year. Now, 2 years ago, we proposed to add a competition specifically for grad students. On the screen, we have excerpts from the Water Resources Research Act as amended in 1984 that specifically declares a congressional purpose of the institutes to promote the development of future water scientists. We also have a scope of arranging for research that fosters the entry of new water scientists. We believe through this program that we're accomplishing these charges twofold, both through the actual resource that you will conduct, but also by giving you the experience of developing what may be your first research proposal. Let's get started with the actual grants application process. Now, I'm assuming here that you want to do research and that you have a potential project in some corner of your brain. In your research career, you will either actively seek out grant opportunities or someone might send a notice of a grant opportunity your way. Much of the time, these opportunities will be accompanied by a request for proposals or request for applications. Today, I'm going to use RFP and RFA interchangeably, although I should probably note that RFA is more likely the common term that you'll see in academia. Now, the very first thing I want you to do when you get these is read the RFP. The RFP was hopefully crafted very carefully to give potential applicants all of the vital information they need to decide whether or not this is the right opportunity for them. It's also an instruction manual for how to apply. Now, sometimes these RFPs are really long, so I'm going to give you permission the first time to just skim it. Have your research in mind, though. You want to primarily pay attention to 3 key areas. The deadline to apply, so ask yourself, do I even have enough time to write this grant? The purpose and the focus of the grant program, see if it's a fit, and whether or not you're even an eligible applicant. And if the grant's going to restrict funding anything, that's going to make it impossible to complete your project. So let's put this in action. The Iowa Water Center RFP can be accessed from our website, water.iastate.edu, by going to the Research tab under IWC Grant Competitions. There is a link to the RFP on that page. So this RFP covers both that $30,000 seed grant competition, but also the graduate student supplemental competition. The process to apply is the same. The purpose of the programs are different. Now, the deadline to apply, I will tell you, is November 8th, 2017 at 5 p.m. This time, 5 p.m. is hard and fast unless there are extenuating circumstances. So if we have a server malfunction that prevents us from accepting your submissions, or there's a power outage. Now, if it's on our end, we will contact people by posting it on our website, posting it on our social media pages. If there is a problem on your end, you need to contact us as soon as you know, and we'll use discretion over whether or not we can still accept the application. The purpose of this program is for grad students to complete additional research objectives or products beyond the scope of their current water-related funded project. So something beyond what you're already working on. The focus for the IWC grants competition changes from year to year. We have an advisory board made up of individuals representing water-related organizations, agencies, and institutions across the state that help determine the most pressing or trending water topic. We also confer with the Water Resources Research Institutes in our region to see if there might be any crossover. The focus for 2018 is harmful algal blooms, which encompasses a broad range of disciplines and topics, as you can see here in this excerpt from the RFP. However, I will tell you that last year we funded grad student projects outside the priority focus. The focus is there to help compare equally weighted proposals when we're determining who we should prioritize funding for. So for grad student grants, you must be either a master's or doctoral student at an accredited college or university in Iowa nearing the end of your program of study. We don't fund indirect costs, which we'll discuss in depth later. You must include publication fees for a journal in your budget. For every federal dollar you request, you must show 2 non-federal dollars invested in the project from other sources. Now again, we'll talk more in depth about matching funds during the budget development section of this webinar. If you get through these 3 things and you are still interested in applying for the program, you can advance to level 2. Now that you know what you know about the program, take a minute to think loosely about what research objective you want to accomplish. Now, read the RFP again. The second time through, look for critical information that will help you shape your methodology. So when does the project need to be completed? How much money can you ask for? Also, reread the parts that were so important in step 1 and think now instead about your specific project. Does it still fit? Look at what needs to be included in the application. The RFP tends to be very helpful in telling you exactly what needs to be submitted. You don't want to get halfway through the writing process and realize you've forgotten to ask for letters of support, or you don't want to get to the end of the writing process and realize you've gone significantly over the page limit. If you know up front, it'll save you hassle later. Let's look back again at the Iowa Water Center RFP. The project performance period is based on our fiscal grant year through the U.S. Geological Survey. A project submitted this fall will be conducted from March 1st, 2018 through February 28th, 2019. So administratively, we don't have wiggle room for this performance period. However, if your project is going to take you into spring or summer, please note that in your proposal, because we can always grant a deadline extension beyond that February 28th date. We can only provide flexibility in the project date completion, though. The grant money needs to be spent within the budget that you create. The max amount to request for this opportunity is $5,000. So a 2-to-1 match, as I mentioned earlier, puts that match requirement at $10,000. So again, we're going to go in that into greater detail later on that. So also to consider, is this project really additional to your scope of work on your current thesis or dissertation project? Or does it just extend the length of time you have to work on that predetermined project? Think about that. What is your project really about Iowa water? So that may seem like a common sense thing if you're going to think about applying to the Iowa Water Center, but the project has to address water supply reliability or water problems, or it has to expand the understanding of water-related phenomena. Just because the research setting is in or around water doesn't necessarily make it about water. For example, if you're studying a species of fish, your focus for this program would explore the relation of the fish to its habitat, and that would have to be an Iowa body of water. As for the required components, we'll refer to Section D of the RFP. Section D of the RFP gives you those detailed instructions for what you need to include. Items 1 through 6, and occasionally 7, are the cover page of the proposal. Then you'll have a budget justification, And then items 10 through 16 are what we call the project narrative, which is the body of the proposal. And that's a pretty common term used in RFAs throughout the sponsored funding world. So this has a limit of 6 pages. So this is a fairly short proposal, and it can be tough to explain yourself in 6 pages. Item 17 is your CV and the CV of any co-investigators, which would include your advisor. So cost share documentation will likely appear as letters of support, maybe from the department, and those will make up the remaining pages of your proposal. We don't have a limit for those. The most important thing to remember is that the body of the proposal, items 10 through 16, must be 6 pages. You've probably advanced fairly quickly through those first 2 steps, even though it took me a while to talk about them. But now you're ready to begin crafting your proposal in earnest if you still feel like this is the opportunity for you. It's a great time now to talk through your ideas with peers, with mentors, and see if what you're proposing is even feasible. Your friends may have no idea what you're talking about, but you can try talking to them too. And if you want to experience complete disinterest without talking to a human, you can always pitch your idea to a cat. If you really want to be prepared, see if you can't run your idea by the program officer in charge of the grants program. Their name is often found in the RFP. In IWC's case, you can talk to Hannah Bates. Talking it out accomplishes 2 things. It requires you to think of communicating your project in a persuasive way, which is exactly what your proposal needs to be. And it allows you to get feedback when you're more likely to be able to incorporate it into the project design versus at the end when you're ready to submit it and someone tells you, I don't know about that. You might want to rethink doing that. That can be very frustrating, and a lot of times you don't have the time to do that. So now you're ready to write a proposal. Levels 4 and 5 are writing your project narrative and developing your budget. You will likely work on these things simultaneously because making tweaks to one will require making tweaks to the other. The first step for both of them is to read the RFP. Again, I know, you need to reference it frequently and while writing, so print it out and have it next to you. If you're confused by anything in the RFP, get clarification. Your advisor may know the answer, or they may refer you to your department or college's support staff devoted to grants. Additionally, you can ask the program officer. Asking the program officer any question, whether it's running an idea by them or getting clarification about the RFP, is typically welcomed behavior. It's important to note that in most scenarios, they have no bearing over the scoring of your application. So speaking to them won't harm or help your application. It's just the opportunity to get some more feedback. Let's talk specifically about writing the project narrative. So using the RFP as a guide, ask yourself how you will tell the story of your proposed project. So think first about who you're writing for. Do you know who's going to review it? Do they have any knowledge of your subject? How can you communicate it in a way that they will understand? So the RFP is often going to tell you what they need to know and in what order. That's section D of the RFP. It's also common in RFPs to find evaluation criteria, and you'll find that in the Iowa Water Center Grants Competition RFP. You want to clearly label each section of your project narrative so it's easy for the reviewer to know where in your proposal they need to go find that information. If they have to search for it, they might mark you lower. Understand your page limits and the other stipulations. Like for this proposal, it's 6 pages for that project narrative. We need 1-inch margins, 12-point Times New Roman. Now is not the time to get fancy with your grants or try to sneak in a little bit of extra space. It's not an uncommon practice for programs to not review proposals that don't follow the guidelines. It's out of fairness to other applicants. So what? This is a question I want you to consider when you're adjusting the points included in the RFP. So what difference is your project going to make? For you, for your field, for Iowa, maybe for the world? Yeah, you have section D, part 12, that asks for the results or benefits, and you're going to explicitly state these things there. But the rest of the narrative needs to be a setup for this question. Grantors want to fund projects that will make a difference. You are trying to show them through your narrative that this project matters. Is it evident throughout the entire narrative? Before you start budgeting, okay, you've already done that. However, there is a specific part of the RFP devoted solely to the budget. And sometimes, like in our RFP, there's even a form we prefer you use to show your budget, which is on the screen right now. Also, before you begin, know your definitions. Budget categories for sponsored projects are sometimes universal, the same across all RFAs, but a lot of times the sponsor will be very specific in what they mean by each. They'll define those categories for you. I'll go into more details about this shortly. The final thing to consider before beginning your budget is to know your project. Have your methods fleshed out before you begin. You need to know what it will take financially to accomplish your goals. Okay, I'm going to spend some time going over the definition of budget categories. So budget categories are split into two sections, direct costs and indirect costs. Direct costs include salaries and wages, fringe benefits, equipment, travel, and other. So the other costs have a whole host of subcategories. And again, I will define each of these over the next few slides. So in your research career, salaries and wages will often consume a large portion of your research budget. For this program, however, we do not intend to fill gaps in your stipend or tuition. That said, an appropriate use of the funds may be to employ undergrads or other hourlies to do work for you. The calculation for this is very simple. The wage you will pay them multiplied by the amount of hours they will work. Finally, and this might be confusing, but not everyone contributing to the project has to have salary budgeted from the project. For example, although it will take time for you to complete the project, we don't expect you to use grant funds to cover your salary. And if your advisor is contributing time consulting on the project, it's unlikely that they expect you to cover that portion of their time. Now later, when we talk about matching funds, this is a great place to find those matching funds, is project time spent that's being paid from a different source. Now, if you have to pay salary, you have to pay fringe benefits. Your institution sets the rate of fringe benefits, and a lot of time it'll be posted. At Iowa State, for example, it's based on your category of employment. So the cost of benefits is a percentage of the cost of salary or wages. So that's on top of the salary you're paying. You need to also calculate the benefits that will be paid. Moving on to other budget categories. So equipment is defined as costing $5,000 or more and having a useful life of 1 year. So that definition in and of itself pretty much disqualifies anything you will budget for the IWC grad student program. Anything that doesn't qualify as equipment, regardless of how you categorize it in your mind, it falls under materials and supplies. Travel is a common category for this grants program. On the budget form, it's split into domestic and international. Travel includes everything associated with going somewhere, either for field work or for a conference, and it covers the cost of transportation to lodging, meals, conference fees, every other incidental fee that might pop up. If it's related to your trip, it's travel. So for our program, we need to know at the time you apply as much information about the travel as possible. So where are your field sites that you're going to? What conference were you planning to attend? If you can find published fees like example flights or previous conference registration rates, they can allow you to reasonably estimate the cost of your travel. And you should cite these fees in your budget justification, much like citing literature for a paper. So this slide defines the rest of the other subcategories. We already talked about materials and supplies, which is anything you might need to accomplish the project. Publication fee costs are expected fees for publishing your results, so preferably in a rough-a-read journal. Similar to knowing where you are going for travel, we'd like to know at the time of your application to which journal you intend to submit. And there's some wiggle room in that. It doesn't have to be for sure, but it helps us justify the reasonableness of the money that you've budgeted. Consultant services are any fee for service. So an example of this would be sending in samples to a lab for analysis, whether it's inside Iowa State or your institution or outside. Computer services are fairly unlikely to be included, but they're not your typical software or PC purchases. It'd be anything outside of that, like database fees. Sub-awards are another category that you're unlikely to have in this program. This is when you're paying a portion of your grant to another entity to conduct a portion of the work. With only getting $5,000, it's unlikely that you can dole that out into other institution partners. Alterations and renovations are physical modifications to facilities. This is, again, fairly uncommon, and a lot of the times in publicly funded programs, government-funded programs, it's not allowed. Tuition is for grad students on the project, and sometimes is required to accompany assistantship funding, and that's generally a university policy. While we don't disqualify tuition funding for this program, it's unlikely that you can reasonably include that and still accomplish additional research objectives. Indirect costs. These are called IDCs or F&A or Facilities Administration. So this is a federally negotiated rate from an institution or agency that is intended to capture funds that help keep the lights on or keep printer in the paper or pay for administrative staff. Many universities and colleges have a standard rate that equates to a percentage of your direct costs that is added on to the cost of your grant request. However, this isn't the case all the time. Here are some examples of times we use a different rate than just the percentage of your total direct costs. So sometimes the sponsor doesn't allow for indirect costs. This is actually the case with our grants program. So you get to use the full $5,000 for direct cost of doing your project. Other scenarios you may encounter throughout your career include when the sponsor has a different rate they'll allow you to take. For some USDA opportunities, it's 30%. It's usually stated in the RFP. If the project will be completed off campus, there may be a different rate. And sometimes the sponsor lets you use the percentage on some of the direct costs, but not all. Your institution will tell you the different scenarios and what the percentages are. But how do you know which rate to use? Well, read the RFP. If it's not stated explicitly in the RFP, like I mentioned before, so example, a USDA opportunity, you just defer to the negotiated rate, which should be posted at your institution. If you aren't for sure, just ask somebody. At your university or college, there's typically a department or an office that works specifically with grants and sponsored programs. Maybe they do contracts. They can look through the RFP and they can compare it against their previous experience with programs like this and give you an expert opinion. Okay, let's talk about matching funds. Some grant opportunities like ours will require matching funds documented in your budget. Matching funds are the portion of a project cost not paid by the sponsor. It shows that someone else is investing in the project. It demonstrates that you are engaged with others for a broader impact of your research. We have a 2-to-1 match requirement, which is written in the legislation that governs the Water Resources Research Institutes. It's not just a number we picked out of thin air. That means for every dollar you request from us, you have to show $2 of investment from another source, another non-federal source. Now, if you ask for the full $5,000, you need $10,000 in matching for a total estimated project cost of $15,000. If you look at the suggested budget form we provide in the RFP, you'll see a column for federal funds requested, as well as non-federal matching funds. You provide a budget for your matching funds using the same breakdown as the cost categories we just covered. Now, how you come up with the matching funds is up to you. Sometimes, the department's willing to purchase some supplies you need, or someone's performing a service for you pro bono. However, what we recommend, and the biggest bang for your buck in this program, will have matching funds coming from 2 sources: unrecovered indirect costs and salary. Now, it wasn't that long ago I told you that we're not paying for indirect costs. The bright side to this is that you get to count that as matching funds. Somebody is paying to keep the lights on, right? So the first thing you will want to do when you have your direct costs figured out is calculate what you would have asked for if indirect costs were allowed and put it in the matching funds column. For example, if you ask for $5,000, and your university's federally negotiated rate is 50%, you already have $2,500 that you get to claim as matching funds. The next best thing is asking for time contribution from your advisor. If they have a portion of their salary paid for by the department, they can pledge some of their time and benefits to help you on the project. You count for that in the same way you would have budgeted for it if they were getting paid for the project. Base salary divided by the amount of time spent on the project. Now, if your advisor is earning a salary of $120,000 and they pledge half a month to the project, you now have $5,000 for their salary plus $1,375 in benefits. But wait, you also get to claim the indirect cost rate for any match funds you've put in, which nets you an additional $3,188 in match. And just like that, you have $12,063 in match, well over the $10,000 you needed to meet the 2-to-1 requirement. The budget justification, sometimes called the budget narrative, should be viewed as an extension to your project narrative. It allows the sponsor to understand why you budgeted the way you did. Similar to the project narrative, you need to make it easy for the reviewer to understand by using the same budget category headers as given in the RFP. And show your work. If you're asking for $1,000 for lab supplies, tell the sponsor the price per unit and the quantity you're ordering. If you're going to a conference, separate and label each cost, like $200 registration, $375 plane flight, $200 hotel, etc. Make it easy to read and simple to add up. We're not creating a complicated story problem for the reviewer to solve, like back in first grade. Some tips for the budget justification: you need to strike a balance between thoroughness and conciseness. Try to find some visually attractive way to help the reviewer follow your logic. Remember, you're justifying the need for these budget items. So yes, we need to know why you have to have those lab supplies, in addition to how many you're getting and how much they cost. For the IWC grant program, if you're funded, oftentimes we have to go back to you and ask you to clarify some of your budget justification items so that the U.S. Geological Survey grant manager can determine reasonableness. It's a lot of documentation up front, but it tells the story of your proposal in another way. Now, in principle, creating a grant budget is similar to creating a responsible personal budget. You start by reading the RFP and seeing if there's anything the sponsor requires. A common thing for national competitions is an annual trip to a conference to present results. A requirement of the IWC grant student competition is fees for publications. So once you have the required items accounted for, put in items that are non-negotiable. So without these things, the project cannot happen. Later in your career, it might be your salary. For this program, it'll more likely be materials and supplies or consultant fees for labs. Finally, once you've got your required items and your non-negotiables, put in items that would be nice to have. Maybe it's a trip to a national conference or lab supplies that you just like to have. You've done it. You've put together a narrative and a budget. Now you need to give everything a final look through before you submit. Does your proposal package include everything you have to include and follow the guidelines to a T? Does your narrative and your budget justification clearly convey your thought process? Do your budget categories add up to $5,000? And do they match with the numbers on the justification? Is your font, margins, and spacing following the guidelines? If yes, take a deep breath and submit. For this grant opportunity, you submit by sending a Microsoft Word document via email to Hannah no later than 5 p.m. on Wednesday, November 8th. So you've submitted now. Wait. After we get your proposal, we send it out to experts in your field to score based on feasibility, impact, appropriateness, reasonableness. After we get their scores back, we summarize them for the Iowa Water Center's Advisory Board. We meet the third week in December to review submissions, and they make recommendations for which projects to fund. Hannah will let you know, yay or nay, by December 21st. We want you to cautiously celebrate, however, because after we determine who will be funded, we have to run it by the U.S. Geological Survey when we submit our application for funding in January. We should know by March 1st whether or not we have the go-ahead to continue, at which point we will contact you to let you know. Then you celebrate. So now you're at the bonus level. You've gotten funded. Now, I know earlier we said March 1 needed to be the first day of your project. However, we have to do some administrative magic before we get to getting, because we have to set up the account, we have to execute our contracts. You don't have to do much with that. We're going to keep you in the loop on that process. We'll give you a green light to spend the money as soon as we can. So after that, you're off and running. Do your project. Communicate with us if you run into issues, if you need extra time. Tell your research story. Disseminating research results is one of the primary purposes of the Water Center. We'll be in contact with you to get informal updates for our blog. And we're also going to tap on you to present either a poster or a short presentation at the Iowa Water Conference in March, the year that your project is finished up. You'll need to submit a paper to a peer-reviewed journal as part of your project, and the final requirement will be a short annual report, which also has a template, so it's pretty easy to finish up. So that's it. The key takeaways for today were hopefully read the RFP and get clarification if you need it. Ask a question if you have one. That's what we're here for. We want this program to help develop both your body of research, but also you as a researcher and hopefully a potentially future faculty member. Iowa Water Center staff is happy to answer your questions as you go through this process. We look forward to reviewing your proposal. So thanks so much. Let us know if you have any questions. Appreciate your participation.